The Remarkable Rocket, from The Happy Prince and Other Tales, written by Oscar Wilde. The king's son was going to be married, so there was general rejoicings. He had waited a whole year for his bride, and at last she had arrived. She was a Russian princess, and she had driven all the way from Finland in a sledge drawn by 6 reindeers. The sledge was shaped like a great golden swan, and between the swan's wings lay the little princess herself. Her long ermine cloak reached right down to her feet. On her head was a tiny cap of silver tissue, and she was as pale as the snow palace in which she had always lived. So pale was she that as she drove through the streets, all the people wondered. "She's like a white rose," they cried, and they threw down flowers from the balconies. At the gate of the castle the prince was waiting to receive her. He had dreamy violet eyes, and his hair was like fine gold. And when he saw her, he sank upon one knee and kissed her hand. "Your picture was beautiful," he murmured, "but you are more beautiful than your picture." And the little princess blushed. "She was like a white rose before," said a young page to his neighbour, "but she's like a red rose now." And the whole court was delighted. For the next 3 days everybody went about saying, "White rose, red rose, red rose, white rose," and the king gave orders that the page's salary was to be doubled. As he received no salary at all, this was not of much use to him, but it was considered a great honour, and it was duly published in the Court Gazette. When the 3 days were over, the marriage was celebrated. It was a magnificent ceremony, and the bride and the bridegroom walked hand in hand under a canopy of purple velvet embroidered with little pearls. Then there was a state banquet which lasted for 5 hours. The prince and the princess sat at the top of the great hall and drank out of a cup of clear crystal. Only true lovers could drink out of this cup, for if false lips touched it, it grew grey and dull and cloudy. "It's quite clear that they love each other," said the little page, "as clear as crystal." And the king doubled his salary a second time. "What an honour!" cried all the courtiers. After the banquet there was to be a ball. The bride and bridegroom were to dance, the rose dance, together, and the king had promised to play the flute. He played very badly, but no one had ever dared to tell him so, because he was the king. Indeed, he knew only 2 airs, and he was never quite certain which one he was playing. But it made no matter, for whatever he did, everybody cried out, "Charming, charming!" The last item on the programme was a grand display of fireworks, to be let off exactly at midnight. The little princess had never seen a firework in her life, so the king had given orders that the royal pyrotechnist should be in attendance on the day of her marriage. "What are fireworks like?" she had asked the prince one morning, as she was walking on the terrace. "Well, they're like the aurora borealis," said the king, who always answered questions that were addressed to other people, only more natural. "I prefer them to stars myself, as you always know when they're going to appear, and they are as delightful as my own flute playing. You must certainly see them." So at the end of the king's garden a great stand had been set up, and as soon as the royal pyrotechnist had put everything in its proper place, the fireworks began to talk to each other. "The world is certainly very beautiful," cried a little squib. "Just look at those yellow tulips. Why, if they were real crackers, they could not be lovelier. I am very glad I have travelled. Travel improves the mind wonderfully and does away with all one's prejudices." "The king's garden's not the world, you foolish squid," said a big Roman candle. "The world is an enormous place, and it would take you 3 days to see it thoroughly." "Any place you love is the world to you," exclaimed the pensive Catherine Will, who had been attached to an old deal box in early life and prided herself on her broken heart. "But love is not fashionable any more. The poets have killed it. They wrote so much about it that nobody believed them, and I'm not surprised. True love suffers, and it's silent. I remembered myself once, but it's no matter now. Romance is a thing of the past. Nonsense, said the Roman candle. Romance never dies. It is like the moon, and it lives for ever. The bride and bridegroom, for instance, love each other very dearly. I heard all about them this morning from a brown paper cartridge, who happened to be staying in the same drawer as myself, and knew the latest court news. But the Catherine Wheel shook her head. Romance is dead. Romance is dead. Romance is dead, she murmured. She was one of those people who think that, if you say the same thing over and over a great many times, it becomes true in the end. Suddenly a sharp dry cough was heard, and they all looked round. It came from a tall, supercilious-looking rocket who was tied to the end of a long stick. He always coughed before he made any observation, so as to attract attention. Ahem, ahem, he said, and everybody listened except the poor Catherine Wheel, who was still shaking her head and murmuring, Romance is dead. Order, order, cried out a cracker. He was something of a politician, and he'd always taken a prominent part in the local elections, so he knew the proper parliamentary expressions to use. Quite dead, whispered the Catherine Wheel, and went off to sleep. As soon as there was a perfect silence, the rocket coughed a third time and began. He spoke with a very slow, distinct voice, as if he was dictating his memoirs, and he always looked over the shoulder of the person to whom he was talking. In fact, he had a most distinguished manner. How fortunate it is for the king's son, he remarked, that he is to be married on the very day on which I am to be let off. Really, if it had been arranged beforehand, it could not have turned out better for him. But princes are always lucky. Dear me, said the little squib, I thought it was quite the other way, and that we were to be let off in the prince's honour. It may be so with you, he answered. Indeed,